Okay. 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 Hello. Okay. Sorry. Let me start. Okay. Hello. My name is Kiana McBean. Today I'll be presenting my doping and sports presentation. And yeah, I have case study number 8. So we are going to start talking about that. So, first question is, what is doping? Doping is essentially referring to when you are using prohibited substances in sports or anything to, maintain or try to gain muscle, try to make yourself leaner, or even just trying to, you know, give yourself a faster recovery time. Okay, so as you can see, doping connects to physiology of exercise because these substances directly affect our body systems. Okay, first of all, physiology of exercise is the scientific study of how human body systems respond and adapt to short and long term physical activity, excuse me. So if you try to connect doping and physiology of exercise, you'll clearly see that if you're putting substances in your body that do not belong in your body, where our bodies are not meant for those, then naturally that's going to upset the system that is already naturally flowing in its state. Okay, so that's how they are connected basically. Doping really affects almost every major systems that are in your body, which we do learn in physiology of exercise. So my case study focuses on Jannik Sinner. He was the number one tennis player in Italy who was accused of using a prohibited anabolic agent, which is called Clostebol. In March of 2024, he tested positive for using it, which was banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency that goes by WADA. Clostebol is an ingredient that's used in topical creams, sprays. It's something that you can easily purchase, and obviously, it's not a big factor in those sprays and creams, but it is an ingredient in those creams. So his team tried to argue that essentially, it wasn't him. He didn't have any ill intent. He wasn't purposely taking steroids, but another staff member on his team, on his recovery team, was using it for their own personal needs. And because those things get into your skin, they're easily able to be transferred over to someone else from skin to skin contact, because you know how sometimes they say like, oh, you had this seeping through your pores or whatever. So that's essentially what happened. That's essentially what they were claiming happened. They're claiming that he never had any ill intent to use it, but because someone on his team was using it, when they went to do his treatment and like stretch him out, roll him out, ice his legs or whatever, that transferred the steroid onto him and it got into his bloodstream. Okay. So after the investigation, the WADA did find his claims to be true, but they have an extremely strict policy on liability, assuming liability. So, regardless if you had ill intent, regardless if you were found not negligent or not at fault, which he was, you still have to assume the consequences. You still have to, take control of that and just unfortunately deal with what consequences you get, because at the end of the day, while it's this case is not a average doping case, because it definitely kind of conflicts from like the ethical side of things versus just like what's morally right. And it's kind of like at the end of the day, if you are such a high level athlete, you have to take these precautions, like that you're not supposed to be anywhere around that. So unfortunately, that has to reflect onto your team. So if you know that these creams are used, or at the end of the day, you should be making it known to your team that this cannot be anywhere around you. So if you have an injury, you have a cut, you have a bruise that needs something, you need to be checking the ingredients to make sure it doesn't have any prohibited substances in it, especially if you know. I would assume that somebody who is on a recovery team, they would know that these anabolic steroids and agents, they can transfer over from person to person. So it's kind of a lose-lose, because at the end of the day, he didn't mean any harm, he didn't have any ill intent, but he still didn't do his best as the number one athlete in Italy to make sure that these situations did not occur or taint his name. So this is a picture of Jannik Sinner, and this is the World Agent Anti-Agency Doping logo. Okay, so there are a lot of psychological effects when it comes to taking these anabolic steroids or just taking any prohibited substances. Um, Clostebol belongs to a class of anabolic androgenic steroids. The WADA has that classified as a agent one, as a section one agent. So it basically works through your pathways and it increases protein synthesis. It promotes muscle hypertrophy. It improves recovery and it can improve strength and lean mass, right? So it has all these great effects, but with everything good, there always comes something bad. So for a lot of people, it carries a lot of major long-term risks, especially if they abuse it and they use it for long periods of time. You can have hormonal balance, shrinking of testicles on low sperm counts, which equals infertility in men, and in women it can cause them to have a deeper voice. They can grow facial hair, or they can even have irregular menstrual cycles. It can also do the same thing that it does to men, how it takes away their low sperm count. It can take away a woman's egg count and essentially leave her infertile just as a man. Cardiovascular effects, it can raise your bad cholesterol and it can take away your good cholesterol. It can also strain the heart and lead to hypertrophy, which is really known as an enlargement of the heart. So if you're taking these steroids and all this stuff, your heart is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which eventually can lead to heart failure, which nobody wants. Mental effects, a lot of people, know that, like, when people are on steroids, they get extremely mean, they get angry, they like to call it the roid rage. You essentially just like you cannot control your anger. You get anxiety, mood swings, and it can even come to an addiction, because a lot of people, they try to tell themselves that, oh, we're only going to do it for this game, or we're only going to, do it for that game. And you eventually get addicted to the high, and you get addicted to the fame, or all of a sudden, you went from a at best average player to now your numbers are out of this park and you're getting like all this attention and everything from others. So it kind of, you can get caught up in the thrill of it, and essentially like it goes from one time to every day, every game. And now your heart is pumping extra fast just from standing up, like your kidneys are in failure. So there's a lot of different things that can come from a lot of psychological, physiological effects that can come from doping and using these prohibited substances. It could also cause acne, hair loss, stretch marks from quick growth. So in my opinion, I think that there are way more cons than pros to using these prohibited substances. Okay, so for ethical implications, obviously, when it comes to a case like this, it's very hard to, try to make a decision as to how to proceed with it, because you have to think about it from all aspects. So, one, you have to think about it from the player's point of view, how he is expressing himself, what his legal team is, fighting for, and what they are essentially claiming is that he didn't have any ill intent. He never planned on, purposely taking steroids or these prohibited substances to up his game. But then you also have to look at it from the WADA's standpoint. And if you let one player go because they said that they never had ill intent, then it kind of creates like, it's not fair because you have to think about how many other players have said, oh, I didn't mean to do that, or oh, it was an accident. So it's kind of like, you can't really, when it comes to an agency that enforces rules, you have to either enforce the rules for all or enforce them for none. And unfortunately, that kind of, it does get sticky because I also do believe that not everything is black and white. I think that everything has a middle area, a gray area, and, I think that deserves to be heard. So, there are many ethical implications when talking about prohibited substances. One is the fairness during competition. Obviously, when you're playing with someone who is on these prohibited substances versus someone who is not on any substances, you're gonna see you're not gonna see fairness in competition. You're going to see an unfair advantage that they have. Usually, people who take these substances are stronger, they are quicker to recover, and you're going to see that reflecting in their play. Even if you don't see it in the first day, the second day, you're going to maybe the second week, you're going to see it in the month or two. You're going to see their progress and their performance go from 5 to 20 in no time, and it's not fair to the other players who are constantly training, constantly dieting, working on themselves to get better the natural way versus somebody who kind of decides to take a shortcut for the sake of it being easier. So doping creates an unfair advantage because those athletes are stronger, leaner, and have a faster recovery time. In Sinner's case, even though the traces of the anabolic agent were exceedingly small and most likely accidental, it raises questions about the fairness of his past games since everyone follows the same guidelines. And that's another thing. We do have to acknowledge while, yes, there was an anabolic agent found in his system, the traces were so minute that it couldn't have even possibly really affected how he played his game. So you also do have to take that into account. But coming from the world's anti-doping agency, it doesn't matter. It was still found in your system. Even if it was so small that it wouldn't cause any lasting effect, it's still in your system and you still have to take accountability for that. With cases like this, we must also address the message it puts out to his fan base and young children that look up to him. Merely the accusation of using prohibited substances can have people question your ethics and moral compass. And that is another thing with these types of cases or any type of scandals in the sports world. Reputation is everything. And once that goes out into the world, obviously these cases aren't investigated 1, 2, 3. So for a very long time, even if it wasn't too long of a period, I believe they found the stuff in his system in March of 2024. And by February of 2023 is when he was issued his 3-month suspension ban. So within that year, while people are trying to figure out, did he do it or did he not do it? There are young, impressionable children and adults that look up to him or anybody in the sports world that are taking in this information and they're seeing like, okay, well, if my favorite player did it, maybe I can do it. And obviously as a role model, as an influencer, because once you get into that position of fame, you are automatically going to be a role model, whether that is your platform, whether that's your brand, whether that's something that you want to do or not. You just have to accept that you are in the limelight and there are going to be kids and young adults that look up to you. So you have to be mindful of how you present yourself, how you present your brand, and what you put out there. Because if you are being associated with steroids, there's some people that are going to hate you for it, but there are also some people that are going to say, well, if he did it, I should do it too, because young kids are impressionable. So you have to, pay attention to that and make sure that when you have a brand, you are protecting it to its full entity. Because Sinner was deemed no fault, no negligence, that didn't happen. Sorry. Athletes directly impact our youth and how they behave, and think it is extremely important that their role models do not promote it. Lastly, the main ethical implication is the world's anti-doping agency and their strict liability policy. The WADA has a strict policy that regardless of intent, if prohibited substances are found in your system, you will face consequences. This creates an ethical dilemma because it is important to stick to your rules and impose them on all, but is it fair to punish a player for something that was accidental or out of their control? This creates a conversation about what is ethically versus morally right. This case shows that doping is not so black and white. And I completely agree. I think that this case does show that there is a gray area because you can say he did drugs, or you can say he had steroids found in his system, and someone else can say, wow, that's crazy. He should be disqualified. He should not be able to play in these tournaments, and he should be stripped of his titles. But if you say he was found with steroids in his system, but it was such a small amount that it wouldn't have even impacted the way he played, and it was transferred from one of his staff members into his system and he had no ill intent, that changes the context of the case. That changes what people would think on the outside. It makes you think like, okay, well then maybe he shouldn't really be punished because it's not his fault, it was accidental. But when you have such a big agency, you have to impose your rules on everyone. You can't pick and choose who gets to get a hall pass or a free pass, and which person has to suffer the consequences, even though he was found not at fault and not negligence. It's still the WADA's responsibility to show that we don't stand for it whatsoever. It doesn't matter if it was accidental. It doesn't matter if you didn't have any ill intent. It's not allowed. And that's it. You have to suffer the consequences for your actions, because at the end of the day, whoever, they always say, like, you are a representation of who you work for. So if I work for you, then I have to make sure that I present myself in a good way, because I am, presenting you as well. Like, I am a reflection of you and how you carry yourself. So at the end of the day, his staff is a reflection of him. And even though it wasn't his fault, he still employs his staff. So that's still, he has to resume responsibility for his staff in the way that they have, been acting, or whatever creams maybe he needs to, for future, he needs to ban those creams. If you have bruises, if you have anything like that, you have to go directly to the doctor. It's one of those things where it's kind of like you just have to take responsibility and move forward, and next time you move differently. So here are some diagrams. As you can see, these are some effects from that you get from taking these anabolic agents, these prohibited substances. We have mood disorders, tendon ruptures. And that's another thing, is like, a lot of people, they take steroids, they take these prohibited substances, and it ends up hurting their body more than it did for them. So now you end up getting in trouble for doing the steroids. You end up pulling muscles, hurting yourself, and now you can't even play, not because, oh, I wasn't good enough, but you can't play because you cheated and now you're injured. So it's kind of like, it's better to just do things the natural way. And, if the pressure is too much, if you feel like you have to be good, then maybe it's best to always put your mental health first, because that is another thing, is that a lot of athletes will feel the pressure to be good because of all the weight that's on their shoulders from the outside. But at the end of the day, everybody is an adult, and you have to know when you can't take anymore. So whether that's you saying, okay, I don't want to play anymore, okay, this pressure is too much, you have to decide what's best for you and what's best for your brand. Okay. We also have cardiac hypertrophy, hypertension, hepatotoxicity, and here you see a picture of the heart before these prohibited substances, and you see a heart after these prohibited substances. Do you see how at the bottom the heart is enlarged? That's essentially cardiac hypertrophy, is when your heart starts to enlarge and enlarge and enlarge, and then it will lead to heart failure. So you could end up passing away from something so small as steroids, just because you wanted to, give yourself an extra boost for game time. So conclusion, Jannik Sinner was the number one Italian tennis player until he was caught with an anabolic steroid in his system. Him and his team argued that a member of his staff used it on themselves for an injury, which is common. Then it must have had transferred onto him and onto his body during treatment. This isn't a regular doping case because Sinner did not have ill intent. Although he was proven to be not at fault and not negligent, he still faced a 3-month ban due to the WADA's strict policy on liability. Taking any type of prohibitive substance to gain muscle or have a faster recovery time is extremely dangerous. It can lead to heart failure, kidney failure, reproductive systems, and more. And that plays into where I spoke about the physiological effects of doping, the cardiovascular effects, how I said it essentially will attack every single major body systems that you have until it all shuts down. So it will attack your kidneys, it will attack your liver, it will attack your reproductive system, it will attack your skeletal, your muscular system, your urinary system, your every system that you have. It will slowly attack little pieces of it, piece by piece, until you essentially don't have it anymore. After reviewing this case study, I want you to ask yourself, do you believe, regardless of intent, athletes should be responsible for what shows on their drug test? Or should context and intent directly reflect the consequences said athletes receive? So I want you guys to ask yourself this question, because this case is not just a straight head on, he took this to get better and cheat, and so he receives consequences. Obviously, it was proven that Sinner did not have ill intentions to cheat and it was all an accident. But I believe that at the end of the day, when you are at that level of position of anything in the media, in sports, in music, in any type of position, you need to move logically and you need to move smartly. You can't do these things where they could potentially affect your business. So while I do sympathize with him, I still feel like you are making a lot of money to make sure these things essentially don't happen. You know, you kind of have everything at your disposal, at your you have everything at your feet to make sure these things don't happen. You have the resources, you know, you have the staff, you have the people to make sure that these things never happen to you. So you need to take precautions, especially if you know what agencies you're dealing with, if you know the serious implications or repercussions that you can have from taking these steroids. You need to make sure that you aren't leaving anything to chance, because this is your career you've worked so hard for. So um I believe that not everything is so black and white, especially considering some prohibited substances are found in over-the-counter sprays and creams. And I also do think that the fact that you are able to find these substances in these creams that you can go to buy from a regular CVS or Target or Walgreens, I think that maybe instead of the WAD completely changing their rules and laws on their strict liability, they can maybe mend it a little bit. So if you know that these anabolic agents or these prohibited substances are found in things that you can easily get from a pharmacy to treat a wound or an infection or a bruise or anything, then maybe it should be the amount of the substance that's found in the system that determines the type of consequence that they receive. So for example, if you know, you can tell that he didn't have enough in his system to even affect his how he plays or his performance, then maybe he shouldn't have received any type of, you know, punishment for that, because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, clearly it was an accident. There wasn't enough to, you know, hinder his performance, change his performance. So then we can let him go. Okay. So, you know, he did receive a 3-month ban, but the ban timing was specifically made so that he would still be able to play in the series, the biggest golf tournament. He did not miss any real events that would affect his title or would affect his stance. So I think that also shows that it's not only the duration of the suspension, but it is the timing, because the timing could have happened during one of his biggest games of the season, and that would have completely set him back. But because the ban was at a time period where the games that were happening during that, it didn't really affect his title if he played or not. It helped him significantly in the long run, because if he missed that game, he probably would have not been able to recover from that. But because the ban was placed in a time where he was allowed to miss games that didn't really matter, you know, he was able to save himself a long times away. So I think that, you know, doping and taking these anabolic agents or prohibited substances, it's not always so black and white. I think that doping does create a conversation around ethics and morality and what's right and wrong, or maybe you should be a little bit lenient on this side, because morally you just feel like you have to. So I think overall he shouldn't have been punished. I think that the WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, should modify their rules just a little bit in terms of like maybe the amount of substance that's found in your bloodstream or in your system to determine then whether or not you're held accountable, whether or not you would, receive punishment whatsoever. But I do think that, you know, if you are going to impose a rule, you have to impose it on everybody, regardless how unfair it is. But I also do think that they can take other measures to make sure that people who clearly were accidental would not, receive such a harsh treatment or punishment. So thank you for joining my presentation.